Today I have not only one, two, but three easy woodworking projects that anyone can do. Whether you're new to woodworking and looking for skills to gain, or a seasoned pro with builder's block, these three woodworking projects will hopefully inspire you to get out and try something new. Let's get started. First project is a tiered or stacked Lazy Susan. I use this Milescraft jig all of the time and I honestly have no complaints. Using a 1/4" spiral bit, I do a few passes with my trim router just to get the circumference dialed in. For this project, you'll need to cut 2 circles at different sizes, no need to get crazy on measurements. I removed most of the waste at the bandsaw. You could also use a jigsaw for this. Make sure to get as close as you comfortably can to the router cuts. I installed a flush trim bit to the router table to flush up the bandsaw cuts. You honestly don't need a router table for this. I just go to the router table more often because of the dust collection. A trim router will work just fine. For the stand in the middle, I grabbed a scrap piece of walnut. I'm just winging it with the design here. I drilled 4 equally spaced holes and cut a line from the corners to each hole. This created a bow tie shaped piece of wood. I used a spindle sander to give everything its final shape and then added an 1/8" round over to make it nicer to the touch. The joinery in this is actually extremely simple. I just drilled 1/2" holes through the center of each circle to fit a 1/2" dowel. What's great about circles, if you use any sort of jig to cut them, the exact center is already marked for you. Once all the holes were drilled, I placed the dowels in them and glued everything up accordingly. This is more than enough to hold everything into place. There's actually no need for multiple small dowels. For this project, I use Rubio Monocoat for the simple fact that it's extremely easy, quick to apply, and it makes walnut look absolutely amazing. I don't really use the accelerator as it's rumored to have solvents and I like my lungs in skin. To make the Lazy Susan less lazy, I got this spinny type hardware from Amazon for pretty cheap. It uses ball bearings and it's actually quite smooth. It has these countersunk pilot holes to mount directly through the rubber pieces, but you can honestly just set it on top and it spins quite well. You can use these as cupcake stands for weddings, product displays, or whatever your mind can think of. But a pro tip, anything for weddings sells extremely well. This next project is a large display case. I was asked to make a display case for a large wooden model ship and needed to keep it light in weight and cheap on material. I resawed each board down the middle to make the panels, which allowed me to do some cool looking book matching. If you're making one at home, this step is not necessary if you have enough lumber to make a thicker cabinet. I was able to turn the 4 boards into 4 book match panels, and after glue up I used a card scraper to remove the squeeze out. I cut down each panel to length on the miter saw and moved to the router table to create rabbet joints for the cabinet joinery. I made sure to add rabbets on the back of each panel to fit the plywood backing I'll be using as well. After my joinery was cut, I used this tiny little straight bit to cut a groove along the length of each panel. This groove will house the acrylic sheeting that will allow you to see into the display case. To cut the plywood in acrylic, I switched my combo blade out to an 80-tooth blade for cleaner cuts. This is super necessary for the acrylic. To also help with cutting the acrylic, I used blue tape along my cut line to limit splinters, and actually, it turned out to be a pretty clean cut. Before gluing up any type of cabinet, I like sanding anything that would be hard to reach afterwards. I use blue tape to clamp the corners and hold the plywood backing in for glue up, and then move to the table saw to separate the top. You'll see a void where the plywood backing is too small, and that's actually for the customer to place a light bar to light up the ship later. I made a cut around all of the edges without going all the way through, and then used a Japanese pool saw to finish the separation. A block plane or a chisel will flush up the inconsistencies nicely. I came across a problem. The acrylic sheeting was too flexible to stay inside of the grooves. It would just continue to fall out. So I decided to make clamp displays. You'll see what I mean in a minute. I milled up some cherry to place in the door frame, which will actually help the acrylic stay flat, and also added a cool design element. Cut the rough size on the bandsaw, run it through the joiner, and then finish it up on the planer and table saw. I needed the pieces to be thinner, so I resawed 2 boards, leaving me with 4. Added an 1/8" round over, sanded them down and applied finish, but avoided finishing where I was going to be adding some glue. The finish is my own mixture of boiled linseed oil, high gloss polyurethane, and mineral spirits. Once the glue is dried, I clamp the door to the cabinet and tape the hinges in place. This way for me makes it super easy to install if you're not going to actually be flushing the hinges. One quick note, I added these bolts to the cherry boards on the top. They go straight through the acrylic in the middle. I did the same on the bottom but with brass knob pulls. Now that the assembly is complete, I moved on to sanding and finishing. The finish for the cabinet is also the oil poly spirits blend, and I love how it makes the grain pop without adding any of that plastic look you usually get with poly. It's basically a large shadow box, but I made it with limited materials and I'm pretty happy that I prevailed through it because to me the final product is super cool. The cherry really pops from the walnut. I had this gorgeous piece of walnut, so I wanted to make this project a ladder from just this one board. I ripped 3 pieces at about 2 1/4 inches since the board was about 7 inches wide. Now I love my table saw, but to be honest, it's underpowered for the work that I do and drops my power quite a bit, kind of like this. After I got the power restored, I cut the ladder rungs from one piece at approximately 15 inches apart. I only needed 4, so it worked out perfect. I set my miter saw at 10 degrees and cut the 2 other boards at the same time. This is what makes that ladder lean. The rungs are going to be mortise and tenon into the sides at a 45-degree angle. It seems odd, but it will be holding blankets, so the angle is actually helpful for the display. I mark out where I want my mortises and use a trim router with a 1/4 inch spiral bit to hog out most of the waste. The router leaves me with rounded edges and some cleanup work, so I knock that out with a chisel. If you do use chisels, make sure they're sharp. I copied the depth of the mortises with the combo square and transferred that to my router table to cut the tenons. There are a bunch of different ways to actually cut tenons. I just enjoy mixing some old school and new school with the router table and chisel work. Once I had the fit tight widthwise, I used a pull saw to cut out most of the waste and paired it back with the chisel. Honestly, doing this all on a router table or a table saw with a miter gauge would be more ideal and end up cleaner, but I enjoy practicing with chisels whenever possible. I added an 1/8 inch round over to everything to break down the edges, then sanded it all to 180 grit before glue up. Anytime I do mortise and tenon work, I use this Titebond Extend wood glue, which allows for a longer open time, but I haven't really ever noticed a difference. I made sure to add clamps to every joint when it was dry, and I moved on to the finish. I've been lucky enough to work with walnut often, and have always been in awe at how satisfying it is to add finish to it. But make no mistake, any one of these projects could be done with any other species of wood, and the sky is the limit on when it comes to adding your own spark or creative element. If you like these types of videos, please take a second to like and subscribe. Tell me what you think about it in the comments. I have some more videos queued up over here. Maybe they'll add additional inspiration. Thanks for watching. Happy building.